This is the Film Symbologist. Welcome to the next video in the Prometheus series. In this 17th installment, I will discuss what happened on LV-223, 2,000 years prior to the Weyland Corporation expedition. Was there an outbreak? Was it an accident? Or was it planned? In episode 16, I delved into the purpose and properties of the black goo substance that the members of the Prometheus crew stumble upon in the pyramid. While the effects of the goo on biological creatures are shown in the film, there are many ways of interpreting the intended function of the vases and their contents.
Those things, those engineers, they made something they shouldn't have. And they spilled it. It was your turn to push the button.
According to Yannick, the pyramidal structures on LV-223 are laboratories, and the black goo was an experiment that was accidentally spilled by the engineers. This interpretation is informed by one of the pilot's past experiences while he was stationed on a military base that oversaw a bioweapons research facility.
They are not gods. We're just some experiment. And the Earth was a goddamn petri dish. That's it. But you're never gonna prove that with a bunch of 2,000-year-old mummies.
In a deleted scene, Holloway claims that the engineers' real experiment was mankind, and the entirety of Earth was a laboratory. Under this view, the black goo was just one component of the engineers' experiment. Although Holloway is drunk in this scene, his opinion seems to be informed by his experiences as a scientist, coupled with his observations in the pyramid.
Look at him. He knew he was about to die. Maybe nothing was chasing him. Maybe there was an outbreak. I've seen it before.
This isn't Africa, Ellie.
Outer space.
I saw his head explode a couple of hours ago. I know infection when I see it, Charlie. You know that. There was something inside it, something on a cellular level.
Shaw wonders if the writhing black goo itself may have initiated an outbreak on LV-223, and that this is the explanation for the recording of the fleeing engineers, for the infection, and for the explosion of the head she experimented on. Shaw's opinion is informed by her experiences as a child living in Africa with her father, who died from an Ebola outbreak there. In addition to observing the effects of the black goo on the engineer, she also sees what happened to Holloway and herself, which leads her to conclude that the black goo brings death and is what caused an outbreak on LV-223 that wiped out the engineers in the 1st century AD Earth time. Whether the cataclysmic event was the result of an outbreak, as Shaw believes, an accidental spill of the engineer's experimental goo, as Yannick believes, or something else entirely, the audience is led to believe that the engineers were preparing to embark on a mission just before the incident occurred.
It's fairly evident they were in the process of leaving before things went to pot.
Leaving to go where?
Earth.
If what David tells Shaw is true, the engineers were going to bring the jars of black goo to our ancestors on Earth. The prospect of this occurring seems to terrify Shaw and Yannick. If the events on LV-223 are any indicator of what should be expected for Earth, there is good reason to be terrified. From the perspective of life on Earth, the timing of the engineer's catastrophe could not have been luckier. There is no indication our ancestors had any idea that cargo ships full of pathogenic goo were going to be dropped on them in the 1st century. They would have had no way of knowing no way to prepare, no way to defend themselves or to avoid it. Yet, unbeknownst to our ancestors, this event was halted by some miracle. Imagine the volcano of Mount Vesuvius being miraculously stopped moments before it erupted on the residence of Pompeii in Herculaneum in 79 AD. Apparently, that is what happened with the black goo, but on a global scale. Some critics of Prometheus have pointed to this aspect of the film's plot as an example of lazy screenwriting. Many stories, whether they are told in the form of novels, movies, television shows, or plays, rely on inexplicable events influencing the events of the story. There's even a term for this plot device. Deus ex machina is a Latin phrase translated from an ancient Greek saying that means God from the machine, or in other words, an act of God. The concept dates back to plays in classical antiquity, where divine characters would arrive or depart the stage with mechanical assistance, like a rope and pulley or a trap door and lift. This came to be associated with the storytelling trope that resolves a play's conflicts by divine intervention. A common example of Deus ex machina that many people point to is the use of the great eagles in The Lord of the Rings to transport Sam and Frodo from Mordor after they've completed their arduous journey into Mount Doom. Some critics see the eagles as a convenient plot device that resolves an issue, but in a manner that leads to questions about why the eagles don't appear earlier. In Prometheus, the curious timing of the catastrophe on LV-223 in the 1st century AD seems to fall into this category of resolving plot holes with lazy screenwriting rather than with character development or clever storytelling. In episode 7 of this series, I discussed the influence of 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas on the character of Weyland and the plot of Prometheus. Interestingly, Nietzsche wrote extensively about his opinion on the Deus ex machina plot device. He was critical of ancient playwrights and his contemporaries' use of the plot device to reconcile conflict, provide happy endings, and explain away character actions and story events. Nietzsche found the use of Deus ex machina in narrative art forms as uninspired, unrealistic, unsatisfactory, and ultimately false. I think many people would apply Nietzsche's criticisms to the plot of Ridley Scott's Prometheus, especially as it pertains to the timing of the catastrophic incident on LV-223. If the film's story does rely on an inexplicable and conveniently timed event that occurs off-screen and magically resolves a major plot hole, then I think I'd have to agree that it would be lame. But the event that annihilated the engineers may not have been an outbreak or an accident. It may have been something else. It may have even been planned. Perhaps if we look at what happened to the Prometheus crew while they were on the moon, it will help explain what happened to the engineers. How did the black goo get out and infect the characters in the 21st century? If not an outbreak of the black goo resulting from the human presence in the ampule room, or an accidental release by Milburn and Fifield, who or what is responsible? In the film, David is shown interpreting and interacting with the hieroglyphic controls in the hallway and on the doorway of the pyramid. While the crew members have no idea what the hieroglyphics say, David appears to be able to understand the engineer's writing. Against the wishes of Shaw, the android opens the sealed door to the ampule room and manipulates the urns. David even takes one of the vases back to the ship and tests the black goo on Holloway. The android intentionally unleashed the black goo on the unwitting and hapless human crew members. Could a similar intentional release of the black goo have occurred 2 millennia prior to wipe out the engineers? In a YouTube video published in 2017 by Croft Talks About Movies, the content creator discusses the possibility that there wasn't an outbreak on LV-223, but some kind of invasion instead. He presents evidence that the pyramidal structure was broken into, not out of. Now it could be that there was an outbreak in one of the other pyramids, which spilled out onto the surface of the moon and then broke into the pyramid that the Prometheus crew eventually explored. Or the source of the incident that occurred in the 1st century AD may not have been the black goo at all.
Very negative way of looking at things. Exactly why you should have stayed at home.
Did you really think I was gonna sit in a boardroom for years arguing over who was in charge while you go look for some miracle in some godforsaken rock in the middle of space?
According to Vickers, Weyland is looking for a miracle drug to reverse his aging and cure his mortality. The implication being that such a potion may exist somewhere on LV-223. Perhaps it can even be found within the urns. The jars may not contain a punishment after all. The goo may not be an experimental bioweapon. As discussed in episode 16, it may be a gift that accelerates evolution and even leads to a form of immortality. If not the black goo, what else could explain the evidence for a break-in that Croft discusses, and the engineer carnage the Prometheus crew observes in the pyramid? Each character, informed by their past experiences and observations, concludes different things about the nature and purpose of the black goo within the film. In addition to the characters' speculations, the audience can also look for evidence outside of the film. The title of the movie itself, references to other works of literature and art, and interviews by the filmmakers all offer insights into ways of interpreting the plot of Ridley Scott's science fiction movie. Ultimately, though, we seem to be left with 2 options for understanding what happened on LV-223 in the 1st century. Either the cataclysmic incident is an example of lazy screenwriters deploying the Deus ex machina plot device to fill holes in the story, or it was an explicable event that played out according to a plan. There may also be a 3rd option. In a future installment in the series, I will discuss how the incident on LV-223 was not sourced from the black goo, was intentionally caused according to a plan, and is an example of Deus ex machina all at the same time. If you enjoy content like this and would like to see more, like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. For early access to ad-free videos and to support the creation of new content, consider joining the Film Symbologist Patreon. Links are in the video description. Until next time, thank you for watching.